Yam Shaiva Samupasate Shivaidi Brahmedi Vedantino Bauddha Buddha Idi Pramana Padavaha Kartedi Nayyaiga Arhan Nityatha Jaina Shasanarata Karmedi Mimamsaga Soyamvo Vidadhatu Vanchita Phalam Trailokyanaatho Harihi Soyamvo Vidadhatu Vanchita Phalam Trailokyanaatho Harihi Harihi Om Harihi Om Harihi. All of us together shall recite the auspicious monosyllable, an extremely benedictory one, but keeping in your mind the thought that the chorus recitation should permeate the whole of the universe, bringing about a salutary, sublime effect. Let it help humanity in particular, acting upon the individual mind, intelligence and heart, and also generating a permeating collective influence in the whole globe. This is a kind of sankalpa or creative thought which the human mind alone is capable of generating, preserving and strengthening. Interlock your fingers, put them on your lap, sit reasonably erect, not straining you in any manner, and open your mouth and the heart and join me. As many of you as are here, I expect to participate in this recitation. Never be shy, reluctant or avoiding. Hari Om Tat Jaya Guru. Very good. I have been coming to Malaysia along with Ma. Quite a number of years have passed, and every year we discuss the same subject called spirituality, particularly the science and pursuit of self-realization. Luckily and fortunately in India, we have got a variety of scriptures, eternal writings on the subject. These writings were first evolved and presented in the prehistoric times. Our history extends up to 500 or 600 BC, but before that the world had existed for quite a number of millennia. And history is mute about it. It cannot say anything about it. Whereas in India, in the Hindu society you will find, I don't have to say Hindu society, in India, there are indigenous writings which were written thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. How the society was able to preserve this literature without any change whatsoever is something to be thought about very seriously. Generally a language changes over 150, 200 or 300 years. But the Sanskrit language in which these scriptural writings were evolved, they continue to be the same as they were originally written in the prehistoric era. What does it mean? The thinkers and the language protagonists, they had developed a very special grammar which is wholesome and which had reached the zenith of perfection. And they had locked the language by giving such a beautiful grammar and other rules of formation. So much so, the succeeding generations over millennia had nothing to do with the language in the way of a development. It's a language which has got about 2000 verbs, and every verb is multiplied by prefixes, uniform prefixes, 10. So 2500 multiplied by 10 will mean 25,000 verbs. Can you imagine? Now the entire world talks about Sanskrit as the best language for the computer. In the internet you can access a presentation by a British Sanskrit professor. He was teaching the students, and the parents of the students asked the teacher, "Why should my children learn Sanskrit?" So he gives him a reply. In the reply, he particularly emphasizes the Sanskrit language, when learned, automatically instills and preserves in you a very special cultural refinement. The word Samskrita means cultured and refined. Anybody who learns Sanskrit will automatically become cultured and refined. This is why people should take Sanskrit, he said. In any other language you will find it's very, very difficult to learn it. CUT becomes cut and PUT becomes put. Unless somebody tells you CUT is cut and PUT is put, there is no rule, rhyme or rhythm about the whole thing. But here is a language, as you see it, so you can pronounce it. Without anybody's help, if you know the alphabet properly, the vowels and the consonants properly, you can read any language written by anyone. Any language means any style of literature represented by anybody whatsoever. Now this Sanskrit language, along with the writings, have been preserved by Indians for quite a number of, you cannot count the number of years. It is such a text that I am going to discuss here in your midst. This particular text is called Ashtavakra Samhita. It's a kind of a small compendium on the subject of self and self-realization, on the subject of God, of religion, the ultimate and supreme reality of philosophy, and the self of spirituality. There are three fundamental and basic concepts. It becomes God when it becomes religion, the supreme or ultimate reality in philosophy. In spirituality, it becomes self. In yoga, it becomes a kind of a freedom or a relaxation that comes to you from inside. Now Hinduism or the Hindu scriptures declare that all the three exactly are the same. God is a synonym for the self. The supreme reality is another synonym for the self. Ultimately the self alone is. When it comes to a question of self, it is yourself. You are. You cannot doubt I am. I am is an instantaneous and inevitable experience and realization of every human born on the surface of the earth. When I am, for me, other things are or will be. Without the I, you cannot have a you. Without the I, you cannot have a he, she, it or they. I is the beginning point. It's also going to be the end point. Everything else is subsisting on the self. This self is what you call religiously God, and philosophically the ultimate or the supreme reality. This self is going to be the final particle that the objective scientists are inquiring into and searching for. What is the God particle, they say? Can God be a particle or something very wholesome? What do you mean by a particle? They are looking for the God particle. In the very process, it becomes very ridiculous. If God is God, He cannot be a particle at all. Particle is the finest particle, so to say, the minute piece that you can think and imagine. Here is a wholesome and an endless world before us, around us. How can it be formed from a particle, so to say? It cannot be a particle at all. Now, whatever it may be, the self is going to be the ultimate God particle also when they find it out. Now, we are going to have a discussion. In all these discussions, you will find the subject we discuss itself is a discussion. What do I mean by that? It is a discussion between at least two people. There is a speaker or an exponent. There is equally a listener or a hearer. And it is in the form of a dialogue between the exponent on the one side and the recipient on the other. This Ashtavakra Samhita or Ashtavakra Gita is a dialogue that transpired in the palace of Mithila in India. Janaka was ruling the kingdom from the throne. He became an emperor. Our Sita is the daughter, foster daughter of Janaka. Janaka is cited often in the spiritual circles in the Vedantic circles as a great knower of truth. Many of you may wonder whether this knowledge of truth is only reserved for ascetics and austere people of the forest. Now here is a very clear evidence for Janaka, who was a Maharaja, an emperor. He himself was a great knower. And many people used to refer their disciples ultimately for the last stage fulfillment and enlightenment to Janaka Maharaja. This is a conversation between that king, that emperor Janaka, and Ashtavakra, a sage. Every great and calculable or significant event or outcome in this world, it has always had a contributory cause, something like a cause acting on it. Without that, there cannot be an outcome. The entire world is laden with cause and effect chains everywhere. What is an effect? An effect is the reappearance of the cause in a changed manner. Whatever is in the cause, that alone can be in the effect. The cause and the effect are directly linked to each other. One is a transformed cause, another is a causal effect. This is how you describe it. So here also, this conversation took place between Janaka and Ashtavakra. Janaka was a great king, an exemplary person, a model for many people. He had an enlightened assembly of scholars and pandits. Now the highest forum in the world is the United Nations. There people are supposed to be very enlightened and they start discussing subjects of the world. King Janaka had a court. In that court, the best of scholars and knowers were there, picked from different branches of knowledge, branches of life, departments of life. So Janaka's assembly was reputed for the enlightenment it carried. Whenever the king wanted to perform anything consequential or important, he put up the proposal before the court and asked them to debate upon it and advise him finally. I don't know whether you have attended the court proceedings. The judge always asks the advocates presenting the case from two different sides, will you please enlighten me on this subject? This is how the judge seeks. The advocates are supposed to give enlightening pieces, enlightening instances, so that the judge will be better equipped and rightly equipped to adjudicate on the matter. So the king also used to ask the court participants, members of the court, to tell him whether what he proposes to do or not to do, whether it was right and for the benefit and welfare of the people. In such an assembly, when the session was going on, King Janaka was centrally there and all the scholars were around him, quite a number of them. When the session was there, you know, our country and our tradition are very great. A sage or a saint could go anywhere at any time, unannounced and uninvited. It is just like God coming to your life. When God comes, you cannot say, you have come too early. I have to go to the toilet, so please wait. You cannot say that. God will come whenever it is necessary. And you are not necessarily to determine your necessity and the opportune moment. Any time He will appear or appear not. So like that, representatives, full representatives of God, the saintly people, the knowers of truth also were by tradition, by our tradition, culture, were permitted to go anywhere unannounced. So this sage Ashtavakra went there. But there was something special. He is called Ashtavakra. Ashta means 8, Vakra means bends on the body. So he had 8 bends on the body. Can you imagine? I wish I were a beautiful drawing master so that I could have shown how 8 bends in a body would look like. So when he started walking into the assembly with 8 bends, it was such an unseen and unheard of gait that all the assembly, all the scholars and pandits in the assembly, they started laughing in derision. What did I say? They burst into a laughter, deriding what they saw. When all of them burst into laughter, Ashtavakra sage saw it and he also laughed more heartily. And Janaka, the great king, was sitting right at the center. So he saw both. His own scholars laughed. And then subsequently, the visitor also started laughing. The Janaka Maharaja, in spite of his enlightenment, he felt stunned and subdued. He was in a consternation. With all humbleness, he got up, greeted the visitor and asked him, I have one question and inquiry. May I submit it? Yes, please do. Then he said, I can understand why my assembly laughed. Seeing your gait, whenever you see a defect in man, should you be sympathetic or should you laugh is a different question. So when they laughed, I can understand. Why is it that you laughed? He said, there is a reason. You know, you are a great king and an emperor. And you have got a repute and assembly, all of them highly enlightened. From such an enlightened assembly, when I have come here with no defect which is caused by me, all the scholars are born with no defect. In the same manner, I was born with 8 defects. They have no credit for their birth, and I have no discredit for my birth. The same nature which has made their bodies normal has made my body abnormal. Now, both are a handicraft of nature, so I came here. So instead of understanding and feeling, if at all, a sympathy and additional consideration for me, when I burst into laughter, I was wondering, is this the enlightened assembly King Janaka has? Now, if these people are giving him advice, what kind of an advice they will give? And Janaka acting upon their advice can never be a good emperor or a good ruler. So I was feeling extreme sympathy and derision towards the assembly which is acclaimed to be highly enlightened. Have you understood what I said? Huh? Janaka was stunned. He felt humiliated on the one hand and enlightened on the other. The entire assembly was silenced, subdued. They felt immense shame, pathos. There was too much of self-pity everywhere. When the scene was over, Janaka prostrated before him. I was yearning for finding a good teacher, a spiritual master, a Sadguru. I have found one. So he fell at his feet and said, please instruct me. Here is my question. Now, this is the conversation that is recorded in Ashtavakra Samhita. Whatever King Janaka asked, and the sage replied. The Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, they call it Ramakrishna Mutt now, it has been existing in India for more than 100 years. That institution is a very unique institution. A number of scholars are there. They have got detailed training program for brahmacharis and the others. Whatever books they write in the field of spirituality or culture, all of them will be quite marked, quite singular. It will be a very good representation of what the real culture of the land is. There will be no unnecessary distortion. If I have read spiritual literature like Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, etc., I have always got the Ramakrishna Mission publication and read it. Even Ashtavakra Samhita, which I read, was published by Ramakrishna Mission. The entire Ramakrishna Mission came into expression from Ramakrishna Deva, the great master, and his chosen and beautiful beloved disciple, Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda was belonging to that Brahma Samaj. They were not believing in God and ritualism. They were believing in Brahman, the supreme reality, an impersonal and impartial supreme presence governing the whole universe. When Vivekananda became closer and closer to Ramakrishna Dev used to tell him, please open the book Ashtavakra Samhita and read it for me. Vivekananda would force himself to read the book. And after reading 2 or 3 verses, he said, I cannot read, I will keep quiet. Then Ramakrishna Dev said, you may not like it, but I like it, Baba. Don't you like me? So please read it for my sake. In this way, he was persuading him to read this book. This is a story that is associated with this. In the Ashtavakra Samhita, you will find a sharpness, a precision, a penetration, a suddenness, an instantaneous character in the utterances. Very, very unique. It's a very short, a very brief, precise, but to the point discussion. There is a great tenacity required for you to follow this Ashtavakra Samhita. It is very astutely discussed. And there's a lot of ascetic notes also. With Vivekananda, with so much of renunciation, sharpness, intellectual perceptiveness, etc., if he did not like reading it, you can understand what is the content of the text. But this is the one which later on Vivekananda thought was his pet scripture in the later days of his life. Now when I discuss Ashtavakra Samhita, you should understand, I will get into the text and start straight a discussion. You will find I am not invalidating or contradicting anything at all. I am an upholder of tradition and cultural elements. I am an upholder of temples. I am an upholder of all kinds of acceptable religious forms of worship. But I also say and point out there is a lot of degeneration, distortion, corruption and contamination in the various forms of worship. They are to be pointed out by enlightened people who are votaries of religion, at the same time want the religion to continue in a pure form, and then informing the people, enlightening the people, they have to get corrected. All these have to be corrected. I will not blame a society for whatever wrong practices the societal members have. But I will certainly blame the society if the society does not have at least a handful of thinkers who can go into the disorders, point them out and bring about corrective measures. Am I clear? Don't think that the society, all of them will be able to think. A few can and must think. And they should be concerned with the welfare, cohesion and cumulative performance of the society. These are very necessary. Such thinkers, if they are not there, the society will contaminate it, will become weak. We know of the great civilizations in the West which have perished not for an economic downfall or disorder, on the other hand, a moral and ethical failure. The great Roman Empire perished. Why did it perish? Go into the history and find it out. What happened to the Greek civilization? Try to understand very clearly what makes us exist strong and confidently is not the body and money of the world. It is on the other hand the mind, intelligence and heart. Our mind and mental practices can be corrected only in the hands of intelligence. The intelligence alone has the potential and the habit of going into matters, finding the right and wrong, and compel the mind to leave the wrong and adopt the right. There must be a constant tuition from the intelligence to the sentimental and emotional mind. Unless the intelligence is awakened and it is brought to act upon the fissiparous mind, the multi-pronged mind, there cannot be an integration inside the human personality. Unless you are integrated mentally and intelligentially, you will not be able to employ your senses rightly and effectively in any given field of activity. We have short-term objectives, long-term objectives, immediate objectives also. Similarly, side by side with the economic growth and enrichment of any country, we must also have the cultural enrichment, embellishment, and the cultural reinforcement. Unless we are able to do it, the society will become weaker, and ultimately will perish. And our history, our world has recorded so many instances of this kind. Let us be very, very clear. So I am an upholder of tradition. I don't invalidate anything. I don't contradict anything. Only I will try to reinforce and confirm our scriptural revelations. And in presenting the revelations, I will be relentless and forthright. This is what we are going to discuss.